Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call to order the Orange County Sewer District #1 Advisory Committee. And for those of you that are listening online, you can log into our county website and be able to view this. I would ask that you all silence any electronic devices you have and join me with standing for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Kelly, would you call the roll, please?
Emo?
Here.
Finelli?
Here.
Stevens?
Here.
Ellers?
Here.
Martell?
Here.
2. 5 present.
Chairman Peter Toohey extends his regrets, but he does have a little bit of a personal issue that he is trying to handle right now. He may be here momentarily, so I'm filling in his stead. So at this point, if Joe Mahoney, along with Eric Benega, Mary Beth Bianconi, and Bob Gray, please join us at the table. I recognize that the guy is Megan from the town of Boston, who's just joined us as well. Good afternoon. Sir. Okay, so this is kind of an updated meeting. See where we are. And I guess we'll start off with the variance update. We have some new information, hopefully some positive information that would be helpful.
Summarize where we're at.
Yeah.
All right, so folks will recall we submitted an application for variance now several years ago. We got a notice of incomplete application. We worked for well over a year obtaining data to respond to that notice. We submitted a updated variance some time ago and received additional comments on that. So we are working on the, well, actually the comments we received recently on the total dissolved solids minimization plan, which is part of our regulatory work under SPEEDs, and it is part of the variance. So it's really kind of all one thing. So last week on Wednesday, we had a staff meeting call where we discussed various aspects of the comments that we received from DEC. And then on Thursday, we had a call with DEC to clarify what they're looking for from us. And I'll kind of say what our perspective is on that, and you guys can add to it. They would really like to see us, at least in an initial outset, work towards quantifying, they describe kind of pie chart style, where do we think the relative contributions are coming from? So, we've talked about how this is in the groundwater, so it's passing kind of through the drinking water systems and into the treatment plant. There, from a chloride perspective, there's also human activity that adds chloride. So things like using soap at your house, which is certainly a good thing, but it adds chlorides, those kinds of things. So they'd like us to almost create a pie chart. And this is our initial analysis, right? So the purpose of the TDS plan is to go do additional work to find out why is this happening, where is it coming from, and then what can we do about it. So they'd like us to start somewhere so that as we go forward and we take these steps, we have some way of gauging and saying if we thought it was coming from here and then we do a, say, year of implementation of the TDS plan, and then our data shows us maybe our pie chart was off. Maybe we thought 60% was coming from somewhere and it's really 40%. So that we have a way of adjusting. So I think that was very useful for us to understand. The TDS minimization plan, which is based in large part on the existing mercury minimization program that the state has, requests that you look for on what are called hotspots, which would be, kind of large, intense sources of the constituents that you're looking for. Some of us have backgrounds in the hazardous and environmental kind of side of the fence. And so we think of that as being like, if you had an old factory and you found a 55-gallon drum of stuff that was leaking, that would be a hotspot. DC encouraged us to think about it more broadly, and that was really helpful for us conceptually because we were thinking much more narrowly. And that was extremely helpful for us because again, our discussion has been that TDS, and remembering chloride is a component of TDS, is broadly here in our environment. Geology, human activity, urbanization. And so we were, I think, threading the needle too tightly and we need to take a step back. So that was extremely helpful in that discussion. And we also talked about, I think the last thing that I think was very helpful, it's been a concern here, we've talked about this for a while, is given our understanding based on the science that TDS and chloride are part of the geology, we have this situation of intense urbanization in areas of the county that is exacerbating that. It's just a natural, it's happening across the country, certainly in the Northeast. That there are limitations to what the county's sewer district can do. County sewer district does not regulate drinking water. The county sewer district does not have a magic wand and say, okay, we want to change the geology of the area. The county sewer district cannot say, we would rather have people truck in Avion, because that would have low TDS, right? So there are limitations, and we've been concerned all along that we keep saying we have these limitations. What DEC would like us to do is identify, again, go back to that, identify where do we think this is coming from, how will we assess where it's coming from, and then when we get to the part about what will we do about it, it's fine to identify those limitations. There are only certain things that as a county sewer district, the county sewer district is authorized under law to do and has control over. So I think I felt better about that because I think what we heard from DEC is there's an acknowledgement that as a county sewer district, the scope of influence on this problem is relatively limited. So, because I think we've all been thinking, if we say we have, this situation where we have, some certain quantity of total dissolved solids or chloride coming from a source and the control of that source is beyond the scope of the county sewer district, are we gonna get stuck in this problem where, well, we don't have the authority to do something, and we ask those who do have the authority to do something, and they say, thanks, but no thanks, now are we stuck? And that's been our concern. And we did not hear that from DC, and we kind of went back to, if we think about mercury, because that's the other variance that's out there, mercury came from, I'm gonna use the broad term, Tracy would kill me if I said this, she's not listening. Acid rain, right? So it's depositional. It came from factories that ending up in the environment, it gets rained down, and mercury is sticky, right? It does not, once it's in your soil, in your water, in things, it doesn't go anywhere. So there's an acknowledgement of that. There's an acknowledgement that the steps that are taken by wastewater treatment plants, by other potential contributors, are limited in terms of reclaiming that environmental degradation. And I think this is a similar situation. It was, to me, good to have here DEC say that there is an acknowledgement. Because all along, and you guys have said this so many times, you're probably tired of me saying it, an end of pipe solution will not fundamentally change that when we pump our wells, we're pumping TDS out of our wells. And that's why the variance is structured around, sure, you could build this end of pipe solution. But if at the end of the day, we go back and we read the regulations and the heart of the regulations is protecting health and the public health and the environment, it will not change that. In fact, it may be worse. So it was good to hear that, I think. So from there, Tracy and Anthony and Michael and who's our new person? Are all working on, I'm sorry, I couldn't remember his name, are all working on, are all working on updates to the TDS minimization plan that will be recirculated back to the internal group. And we're feeling very confident we can get that done relatively quickly and then get back to DEC. They're waiting for us, which is nice to have their attention, and we want to keep that going. So that feeds back into the variance, because to get the variance, we have to have a TDS minimization plan approved and in some state of implementation in order for the variance to be considered. That's our update. It's a good update.
So, well, I can understand and appreciate that this is a positive and we are moving forward. But some of the things that you said initially, hadn't we already done some of this?
In terms of,
Well, as far as identifying it, like now they want charts or pie
Mhm.
charts. Didn't we give them all of that information in the initial submissions?
it's a stack of data, this thick.
So now they wanted this.
No, actually, I think it's the opposite, right? They actually want,
One sheet.
exactly, they want us to go from, you know, you guys have all met Tracy, right? They want us to go from Tracy land.
Tracy.
Here's 836 water quality samples in 12 different locations and all that. They want it to go to a plan that is very straightforward. And that, yes, is backed by that data and that science, but you it's asking that question, okay, so you took 836 samples, well, so what? So it's answering the so what question. So this is the forest for the trees kind of operation, so they want an elegant, simple, easy to see way of saying, after all of this, and this is kind of our starting point, you know, make a pie chart and say, okay, so our industrial users, we don't have a lot of them. They're entire, tiny little part of this. And of those, many of them on the face of it don't appear to conduct activities that would add TDS and chloride. We need to kind of dig into that, but they might be some little fraction. So what they're saying is figure out if there's some little fraction, then they may not be the focus of your priority efforts. Your priority efforts are probably on some of these bigger things, which would be, as we said, maybe it's on the drinking water side. Just say, okay, so on the drinking water side, if water is coming out of water plants and it's really hard water, and it's getting to customers in their homes and people are putting in water softeners. And water softener discharging, because a water softener adds salt, right, to soften the water. There are other methods that can be used, so that don't add salt, right? So there are recirculating loops, there are RO systems, there's a bunch of different things. So maybe if that's the lion's share of the contribution, then maybe the priority of our efforts should be reaching out to those water suppliers and having a conversation with them and saying, you know, so what could you do? Could you do supply side softening, meaning at the plant you soften? Could you encourage users to use a non-salt solution for hard water? You know, those kinds of things. So this is really about take all of the stuff we have so far, describe in a simple term, what's the relative contribution, come up with priority areas and actions, and then be able to describe, okay, so we prioritized based on what we knew, we took these actions, we learned from those actions, we then did this implementation, and that resulted in something. And that's really what they're looking for. So you're right, we've paved the ground well. Now we need to start building up from there. So they're looking, we were kind of thinking, okay, it's planned, you have to implement, tell them things, and we're not big on speculation, but they want some starting point. So that's what they're asking.
What is our time frame?
So
Or what time frame have they spelled out?
they
I
have
don't know
not
if they will.
spelled out a timeframe for us. We will,
60 days.
next week, we will get, our work back to these guys. And we've been working right along. So I'd imagine we'd have something back to DEC in a couple of weeks, maybe something like that. So it's pretty quick. And then they've been pretty responsive, so.
The
Any
DEC
questions?
led us at 60 days, the comment letter. Gave you 60 days.
It's,
In that 863 page, I vaguely remember towards the end of it that there was a summary that stated, basically a start of a plan and kind of not putting it in a pie chart, but summarizing the whole of the document prior to that. And we had a basic plan starting in there. So is that,
so that's what we're working on. We're just.
I thought it was in there already.
Yeah, it's been to them and they've commented and now
Okay.
we're, so we're. in
So
there.
they're saying that what we put there wasn't quite enough or wasn't, they wanted
They
to
just want,
change?
they're gonna see it different. I think they wanna think about it differently than we were thinking about it. And we're okay thinking about it the way they wanna think about it. It's just we were focused in a different area. So this is really just trying to, again, understand, how do they want, and really, you guys were on the call, there was a DEC person who said, you know, in my mind, I'm thinking pie chart. And you don't have to do a pie chart, but we're thinking, well, we've got all this data, it's pretty easy to do a pie chart. If you want a pie chart, we'll give you, you know, we want to get to
Yeah,
yes,
pretty
so
easy
we'll give you a pie
conversion.
chart.
Yeah, that's a pretty easy conversion. Do they want us to change any of the proposals that we started for?
Just maybe add some flesh on the bones. We provided some somewhat vague discussion. And again, we're threading the needle between, we don't want to overpromise. We don't want to say we're going to do stuff we're not in fact going to do. And they were really specific about it. They said, don't do that. Don't tell us things that make us feel better if you're not actually going to do those things.
Right.
Um,
That makes sense. I
So,
wouldn't want to do that anyway.
but we also, some of this has to build into action. And we don't want to presuppose actions that at the end of the day, we end up saying, hey, that we'd spend a lot of time and money on that and it wouldn't yield it. Like in France, we talked about a survey, right? DEC talked about, could you do a survey?
Mhm.
And we do a lot of surveys in our work. And we do some surveys that it's easy for people to not pay attention to. We do some surveys that are very, very important, things like lead service line surveys.
Right.
Where you could be, you know, you and your family could be drinking water tainted with lead. You would think that would motivate people to fill out a survey. They're very straightforward, simple surveys. We still only get about a 10% response rate. We have to go track people down. So we talked about survey as a potential tool and said we could do it, but to us, it seems like that's a lot of work and it may not yield the results. Now, DEC doesn't do surveys. So they're like, well, we don't know. And we were like, okay, well, you threw that out there, but we're gonna say in our experience, and this is certainly not something that is maybe, I think, in most people's minds as important as something like lead, right, in your drinking water. And if something as important as lead in your drinking water, we still only get a 10% survey response rate. When we're saying like, do you have a water softener in your house? Those are gonna go right in the circular file. We would spend a ton of money and a lot of effort, and they're gonna end up in the garbage, and we're not gonna get any usable data. So we had a good discussion with DEC about that and said, yeah, we can keep that in our back pocket, but it just experience seems to indicate that may not be a good tactic. So DEC is looking for some more specificity regarding some conceptual tactics.
Okay.
We were leaving it more general so that we could lay some more groundwork, figure out what those tactics were. Again, we don't want to speculate, we don't want to overcommit, so we're trying to figure out what can we, and they don't want that either, but they wanted more specificity than what we had.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Amo.
Just quick, sort of engineering 101, because I really don't understand. It seems strange to me that DEC would ask that question about the pie chart, because pie chart is a sort of a visual way to present data. And coming before that, you've got 800 samples. There should be some mathematical formula, like a regression analysis or something that comes up and says, here are the 8 variables that affect this, and this is a percentage of their
That's-
all weight.
It's all in all that
We
documentation.
have a statistical.
It's all done.
Have we done it?
We did as much as we could,
No, but
based on the data we have.
Why wouldn't they just expect that? I just stick in my head, they expect it. You gotta, it's like you left a step out of the analysis, not that you did.
Yeah,
Why would they
so,
answer, doesn't everybody just do that? You
We-
collect the data, you run the
we
analysis,
did
and
this-
then you do a pie chart.
yeah, we did as much analysis as we reasonably could. Part of so there's some challenges to this. So we did the sampling. All the water suppliers cooperated, which was wonderful. The team went out and did the supply side sampling, so the raw water before it went into a treatment plant, and then they did coming out of the treatment plant on the same day. So the reality is, once that water goes into a treatment plant, depending on the kind of treatment, it might come out the other side in half an hour, or it might come out the other side 2 days later. We then went and did a whole bunch of sampling in the collection system and in the Rampo, but it was sequential. So the water that you sampled coming out of the well in some place, maybe when we sampled over here in the sewer collection system, that water was either not there yet or had been there 2 weeks ago.
Mhm.
So there's some amount, and we want to be really careful about what we were representing, that this is not a scenario where that water came out and we calculated travel time through the systems, so that we knew that this gallon of water came out over here, and then 3 days later, we knew it would end up in this manhole, and we went and sampled it. We did not do that, right? So we wanted to be very careful about you're talking about regression analysis and those kinds of things. We did, when we worked in New York City's watershed back in the day, in the 90s, we did a lot of that type of analysis. We did travel time analysis.
Just, I thought that they would have,
And some of this is inexact in an exact science, right? So we know that some of the supply wells, the water comes out with TDS and chloride well over the regulatory limit coming out of the ground before anybody's touched it, right? Then it goes through a water treatment plant where generally speaking, we're using chlorine, which is adding TDS, right? So how much chlorine is being used? Well, what's the chlorine demand at that particular location? On that particular day, it can be different, right? So we know that's happening. So when we do, now we're doing finished water, we get that number is always higher than the one we started at. Then it travels through the drinking water system. Up and down and up and down and up and down, right? And ends up in the sewer system. And once it gets to us, all of those contributions, and then when we treat the water, we also add stuff to it, because again, we're trying to make it safe for everyone. So part of it is, we have some relative, like when it comes out this way, this much gets added here, this much gets added there, and it results in this over here. But again, to your point, there are so many variables.
Okay.
When we sample the headwaters of the Ramapo, we can get data that shows that the Ramapo itself is above the regulatory standard before we even start. Right, so that's again, back to this acknowledgement that this is sort of this broad problem. And at the end of the day, while we have to do a minimization plan, our ability to affect change in this watershed may be very small.
So it doesn't have to do, I really help you, thank you. To her point, the point was that, you have a pie chart, and you say that 40% is caused by that. The first person, somebody should question somebody, what level of confidence are you at that that's it? Are you 95% confident level, or are you 80%? Or are you flip of the coin at 50%?
We discussed that too. We discussed the variable and the lack of confidence in some of the data that would be collected. We talked about road salt a little bit and
Sure.
how we really can't quantify to any real extent how much road salt is impacting the water supply. But we can do things like educational, like what are we doing to minimize the use of road salt?
Yeah, my point is, if you put the data in the chart, somebody asks you,
Yeah.
you have the answer to that question.
So that's fundamentally why we didn't make a chart in the first place. Because of exactly that, because, Tracy's, we have scientists and they want to be, right? But DEC is asking for that, so it's just gonna have a lot of footnotes. They're gonna say, this is a visual, it's just a visual, it's gonna have a lot of little, things, but that's what they've asked for, so. And we understand, I think their goal was to say, well, how will you prioritize your actions? Okay, that's a fair question to ask. How will you prioritize, how will you know that the thing you're doing is the thing that potentially has the most bang for it? So that seemed to be a reasonable inquiry, so that's why we said, okay, well, so Tracy's busy working on.
So bottom line, you're comfortable with the discussion where we are at this point in time,
I think we're all,
be able to respond to their concerns.
Improvement, not creating.
Yeah. Yeah, we worked through expectations, we worked through what the timeline would be for our staff and our consultant to work through the plan and give them a layout of a schedule, which eventually hopefully results in a variance approval. But how quickly can we work through that timeline using some of the data and work that's already been done? So we're going to show work that was done, but back to 2022, 23, show that as part of what we're already working on in the minimization plan, and give that to them sort of in our schedule. So we can show, they want to see a timeline, a commitment, and then that'll feed into a variance approval. And that's what we're working through. That was a good meeting for it.
So we move on to our next and last item in a update from the public hearing that we held on, was it March 25th?
yes.
Okay. So it's my recollection, we had no speakers that evening. We were there for 2.5 hours. Barry did a remarkable job.
We had a closing time, right?
And we had a closing time. And most of us stayed until the closing time.
Thank you
We
for
kept
everyone
Barry
who stayed.
company.
We may not do that again.
Um,
We did have to kick a few people out.
Yeah.
Send a few people home. Yes, thank you for everyone who attended that. That was the public hearing on the draft environmental impact statement. So that was to obtain oral public comment. We also, and as our chairwoman has said, we had the company of each other. Everyone got to listen to the chat again. It was also videotaped and transcribed. So if anybody, and you guys have copies of all of that, so if anyone wants to watch the videotape or read the transcription, do have all of that as part of our record. We also had a public comment period that extended to Monday, April 8th for written comments.
Yes.
And on Monday, April 8th, we did receive, or thereabouts, we did receive 2 written comments. One was from the Village of Chester through their engineer, and the other was from Kirschtoll and the town of Palm Tree. And then there was a subsequent submission from them with some attachments that didn't make it to the first one. So we do have all of that on the record. I did reach out to DEC because I did expect to receive comments from them. It is not at all uncommon that we receive their comments outside of the timeline, but that's okay. We always accept their comments, treat them as they were submitted during the public comment period. They are sending us comments, perhaps as early as today or tomorrow is what my understanding is. So those comments.
Who are they?
DEC.
Okay,
DEC.
yeah.
Um,
Thank you. Sorry.
Yes, my understanding is those comments will not be technical in nature, meaning they won't be asking us to do some additional engineering study or anything of that nature. Those comments are going to be more framed around permitting. And which is good because that's obviously our goal, that's what we're trying to get to, right? So that will be wonderful. So we are right now where we are in the process is we take all of the public comments that we received. We catalog them with respect to what was the nature of the comments. So, you know, was it something technical? Was it about cost? What was it, environmental impact? We catalog them. Staff right now, our staff is working through what we'll call the technical comments. A lot of those will end up being, the EIS was a very large document, as you guys are aware. Many of those technical comments were actually covered in the EIS. They just may not have found that data because there's just so much stuff in there. So a lot of the technical comments will refer to information that is presented. So it'll be see Appendix C, page 68, where the comment is covered. There are a number of other comments that aren't, you know, did you consider, you know, the size of this tank? Those will be working through, and our intent is within the next 2 weeks to get a draft of the comment responses to staff to review. And then I'm sure we'll have some interaction and some discussions there. Once staff has, and we're settled with those, so if everyone remembers our process, we have a draft environmental impact statement that is responsive to the scoping document, which was the questions to be asked about the environmental impacts of the project. DEIS describes the conditions, the project and its potential impacts, and offers mitigation measures. The comments ask questions about that record. So every comment will have a response. Those comments, written responses, together with the draft environmental impact statement, constitute the final environmental impact statement. It doesn't end the process, oddly. But the FEIS final environmental impact statement will, I'm assuming, run through the same process we did with draft environmental impact statement. We'll prepare things, work with staff. When staff is satisfied that we've got everything the way that it needs to be, it will come to this group for review. We will review it, and then I believe the way this worked the last time, it was referred from this group to fiscal services. Mr. Cheney's committee, fiscal services, then reviewed it and referred it to the legislature, who is the lead agency. The lead agency would then evaluate that FEIS and accept it. And then it would be circulated back to and available to the public and circulated back to the involved agencies. And then there is, this receipt gets a little weird, there's a mandatory 10-day period, but nothing ever happens in 10 days. So after the FEIS is published, and then the final step in the process is working on something called findings. So a finding statement in an environmental impact statement does a couple of things. One is it recounts the process that was conducted. So it will go all the way back to the beginning when the positive declaration was issued and through scoping and all of the actions that have happened since. It will describe, that a hearing was conducted, all of that. And then what it will do is it will walk through the different aspects of the project where environmental impacts were identified, the mitigation measures were offered, and it will discuss how, as a project advances, how those mitigation measures will be the framework for that project to advance through design, permitting, and into construction. That finding statement will be a written document. In my experience, they're usually 20, 25 pages long, something like that. There's a lot of legal stuff, kind of framing the technical information. That finding statement, I'm sure we'll go through the same process. We'll write something, we'll send it to staff, staff will review, we'll work together on it. It will again, once it's a final document from staff perspective, come to this group, and then we'll run through that same process. Eventually, to the legislature who would adopt it, and then it will be posted and circulated in accordance with the SEQA regulations, and that will conclude the environmental review process for this project, project. I know some time ago, we had thought that that might extend later into this year. My sense is that it won't extend quite that long, given, because the real thing that you can never know is what's the nature of the comments you're gonna get. And will those comments require additional studies or more engineering work, or, how much time and effort and energy needs to go into responding to those comments? I think our sense is now that we have those and when we get DECs, we'll have a really good sense of, okay, how much time is it gonna take us to get that FEIS prepared? My sense is at this point, it's not gonna be, a matter of months, it'll be a matter of weeks. Okay,
So you could not get started on working on that until which time you do receive something from the DEC.
we've already started working on the comments that we have in-house right now. I did mention, that's why I called DEC actually, was to say, generally speaking, it's a much better practice to have all of the comments in hand when you begin to respond to them, so that you're gathering like comments together and making sure that there's consistency in that response. And it just happened I had sent them an email last week, because it was around the time that we had our meeting with them, and they did not respond, but I called them today when I was driving down today, and I happened to get someone who was able to tell me that they're coming out. So, we should have something, because they either today or tomorrow is what they said, so don't hold your breath if it's Friday, but it's imminent, which is good. If they said, oh no, it's gonna be like 2 months, then that's a challenge, but if it's coming out this week, then that works really perfectly with our timeline.
Questions? Or anything at this point anybody wants to add? Seems like we're on track.
Yeah.
Mr. Spegan.
Thank you. On the variance, I may ask to clarify in simple terms. I understand that the regs require 500 parts per billion, trillion. And you came up with a number of what? What is the variance asking for? So is it like, you have the numbers?
So that's a good question. So right now, the county has a speedies permit that has the regulatory standards in it of 500 milligrams per liter for total dissolved solids and 250 milligrams per liter for chloride. Chloride is a subset of total dissolved solids. The current plant sometimes meets those, but many times does not. In order to work forward with this, the current permit that the county operates under actually has interim limits in it. The interim limits are 500 milligrams per liter for chloride and 1,000 milligrams per liter for total dissolved solids. Those numbers did not come from out of the sky. That was an actual analysis of, because the plant has been taking TDS and chloride samples since 2010, a very long time, since the draft, like when the draft permit came out. So that was an analysis DEC did to say, okay, what is the capability of the plant so that those interim limits are established such that the plant will be constantly in violation. So the variance does not request a specific number. That's not how the statute is set up. The statute doesn't ask that we do that. what the statute asks us to do is describe why the water quality limit, which is that 500 and 250, can't be met. And that it's not just a matter of, oh, we just don't want to do it. There are good reasons, and again, that gets back to it's ubiquitous in the environment. So the actions that you would take to remove it won't have a demonstrable impact on the environment. That it's human caused or caused by causes that you can't control, right? And that it may have, and I'm very loosely paraphrasing, sort of widespread social and economic problems if you were to implement the solution. So our variance actually works on all three of those. We don't know if DEC is going to accept all three of those arguments, but just like many arguments, you in as many as you can. So the variance doesn't specifically request numbers. However, in issuing a variance, I would presume that DEC will do the exact same analysis that they did when they issued the speedies permit. And so it's gonna, just like if you look at your mercury minimization plan for any wastewater treatment plant in the state, those little tiny words at the very top of the speedies that says the actual limit for mercury is something like 0.02 nanograms per liter, but everybody's gonna get 50. And this is gonna be the same thing. I would imagine, since they're patterning it after this, it's gonna say it's 500 and 250 and you're working towards 500 and 250. But in the meantime, while you're implementing this total dissolved solids minimization plan, you are going to be at X, Y. And I would imagine that based on the data set, which has not changed a lot since they did the last analysis, it's probably gonna be 1,000 to 500, but that may change.
So if you get 1,000 to 500, the county will be in compliance. You're gonna be satisfied with 1,000 to 500?
Yes, the county is in compliance with that right now.
And is a variance like a permanent change or it expires?
It runs with the speedies permit. So it's speedies permits are 5 years, so it runs with the permit because it's a variance from a regulated activity. So you have to be conducting the regulated activity to request the variance. So for instance, today, we're operating a 6 million gallon a day wastewater treatment plant under speedies permit. So our variance is for compliance with TDS and chloride for our existing permit, 6 million gallons a day. In the future, with this project and what the environmental impact statement says is when we apply for a speedies permit for the larger plant, that 9 million gallon a day plant, we're also going to be applying for a variance at the same time. And then those variances run with the speedies permits. The reality of a variance, just like the mercury variance, is you don't worry every 5 years that you're going to lose your mercury variance. That it's because the underlying conditions under which the variance was issued in the first place have not changed. And because those underlying conditions have not changed, there's no justification for the agency to take your variance away. So as much as every species permit in the state, when they renew, they don't go, oh my gosh, we're gonna lose our mercury variance this time, because the underlying conditions hasn't changed. This would be this, because the mercury variance that was issued writ large across the state is under exactly the same regulations that we are applying for our variance. So it's all gonna be processed. That's why we keep referring to mercury. It's the only other one out there that the state is administered. So we look to it because it is the one example that we have, and the state has indicated to us that that is how they will regulate this.
The mercury that you're referring to is a county variance, or that's a statewide?
It's statewide, and it comes in, it's on every wastewater, it's on every species. So if you go look at the village's species permit, you're gonna see at the back end of it, it has a mercury minimization plan. It's gonna say in that little table that says, here's all the things you have to meet. It tells you it's 50 micrograms per liter, but there's a footnote that says, really, it's much lower than this, but everybody has a variance, and the variance is why you have to do a mercury minimization plan. So that's the analogous thing. We're gonna have the same thing. Our species permit's gonna say whatever numbers, it might be 1,500, and it's gonna have a footnote, and it's gonna say, but really, it's 500 and 250, and that's why attached at page 27 is the total solids minimization plan that you must implement. So it's gonna be, so species permit ultimately in the future, I would imagine, will have the MMP, the mercury minimization plan, and the TDS mercury minimization plan. And we'll just, species permit's gonna go from being like 20 something pages long, being like 50 pages long. Because it needs to be more complicated.
Thank you. Anything else? Then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Do I have a second? All in
Thank you.
favor?
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Anyone opposed? Thank you all very, very much. Keep up the good work.
Yes.